So we'll start off by just taking a quick look at my Trados Enterprise tenant. It's a pretty empty tenant. I've got no projects, or I did have, but I've deleted it for the purpose of this exercise. So we'll start afresh. Under my resources, I have a project template set up. I have a workflow set up. We'll come back and look at that in a second. Nothing else is very interesting for this particular exercise. I've got some customers set up already, which I will be using in this project. I did that with a PowerShell script, which you'll see in a second, as I have a service user set up for that as well. And under users, I have a couple of users on there, and groups. I have a bunch of groups in there, and I'm going to be using the engineers group and the project managers group. And under my service users, I have two service users, one for PowerShell. I use that to create the groups and things, so I can just do it very quickly. And I have a Trados Callback Catcher, which is the application we're going to be looking at today. To create a service user, just to show you if you haven't done that before, it's a very straightforward process. You click on New Service User, say My New User, give it a name, whatever it's going to be. Decide the location where you want it to be. It doesn't have to be in root, but sometimes that can make it easier because you can avoid permissions and those sorts of issues if you do that. But you might want to be very specific and only allow your user to have access to particular customers, and then you would not put them at root. You decide what group you want it to go to. Some users or developers will automatically assign the service user as an administrator, because if they do that, they can avoid the same issues with permissions when they want their application to be able to receive callbacks or interact with Trados in some way. If they set them up as an administrator and at root, then they never have an issue with work across the entire platform. But if you're being more specific, you'll decide where exactly you want that to go. You should read a bit about permissions and roles and that sort of thing to understand that really. So I'll just put it project managers, for example, and then you create. And it's as simple as that. Your service user is now set up. So that is a pretty straightforward thing to do. I'll leave him there for a second, and maybe we'll use him in an example when we look at the webhook. So you then go to your integrations, which are the top right-hand corner, down to integrations, and in there you'll see the applications that you've built for your integrations. And I've already got my PowerShell one there, and I've got my Trados Callback Catcher there. But creating an application, again, is very straightforward. You click on New Application, you give it a name, My New Application. You do not need to provide a URL. I think it's just metadata. There may be another reason, some reason for that, and I'd love to be educated on that one. But as far as I'm aware, it's just a reference field for administrators to document where the integration lives. I don't think Trados calls it or uses it functionally, but I could be completely wrong. Maybe if somebody was building an application and not just a proper application and not just using it for a webhook, as I am, perhaps it has another use. You can give it a description, might be useful for you, and then you select the service user who you're using to support the use of this application. So I would click, in this case, My New User, and you would add it, and now you've created your application. And the way that works then is, once you've done that, there's a number of fields to fill in, but you can see that some of them are already created. So the URL we already discussed, and we do not need it. There's an application key provided for you. I'm also not certain what this is for. I couldn't find anything on in the documentation, but it might be part of the extensibility or building an application for those purposes, which I haven't looked at in detail yet. But certainly for what we're using it for today, I do not need that, and it's not a mandatory field. And we can then move to the API access. In here, the client ID and the client secret that we spoke about, these are here. So they're already given to you. So you need to make a reference, make a note of the client ID and the client secret. So you copy those to somewhere safe, because you're going to use those in your integrating application. And under the webhooks, you also do not need a default webhook URL. I tested this and I can't actually see why I need it or how I use it, because it's supposed to be a default. But even if I do use it, I always seem to need a specific webhook URL anyway. I can't not have a webhook URL for each callback that I'm trying to create. So I don't really understand the purpose of that. That's also something that I'd love to be educated on. So the webhook URL, you would add your webhook URL in here, and any events that you actually want it to be collecting a callback from. And it's as simple as that. That's the only information you need to put in there. So you can see some of it's already there for you. So I'll cancel that. I'll delete it because I'm not going to be using it. And let's take a look at my TCC, which is my Trados Callback Catcher, my training and testing application. In here again, I've not entered the application URL. I've got a client ID and a client secret. And for the webhooks, this is where we're going to start our whole exercise. So to do that, I'm just going to minimize this for a second, and I'm going to drop it over here on the left-hand side of my screen. And then I'm going to take my Trados Callback Catcher and put that down here on this side so that we can watch the two as we're going along between us. Can I make this a little bit smaller so it fits the screen? Hang on, like that. Pull this over a bit here. Maybe drop this down a bit so we can see it better. Yep. So we can see the two, and we'll see how it works together. But I close my webhook. Oh no, sorry, I won't close my webhook yet because I need to put the webhook URL in. So the way the application works, my Trados Callback Catcher, you can decide what type of a tunnel provider you're going to use. So I've built the integration to work with Servio or with ngrok. You can use whichever one you like. If you're using Servio, there's no other settings required. You do not need to provide any of the information. It will deliver a webhook URL for you to use without you doing anything. It's really quite nice from that perspective, but it doesn't work in all environments. I can tell you within my own environment at RWS, it's blocked, so I cannot use it. So I have to use ngrok. So I may as well. I'll look at Servio anyway, but I'll show you ngrok how that works in a second. So Servio.net, and I can decide which tenant I want to use. I've got two tenants set up at the moment: Paul's Enterprise and Multifarious Tech Partner. At the two tenants that I've got stored in here. I can change the user interface to something else if I like, but obviously I'm going to work in English. And under the settings, I have a general one. So the local port which the application is working with is 5000. My ngrok settings, if I'm using ngrok, I have to tell it, I have to install ngrok in the first place. Better not to use the Microsoft Store mechanism of installing it because you need the actual ngrok exe. So I would go and download that file. It doesn't install anyway. It's just a file that you download it and sits in a folder somewhere. Decide where you're going to put it. Put the folder there, and the application will use ngrok in order to do the work that it's going to do. You need to add your ngrok authentication token, which you get from your ngrok account. It's completely free. You don't need to pay for anything like that. If you do pay, you can create static URLs, and it saves you having to keep changing them all the time. But I'm just using the free account. And then at the Trados, you can add in here, you give it the name, you specify the region you're working with, Europe or Canada, you put in your tenant ID, your client secret, and the secret key if your application is actually able to use the verification. I don't think all developers use that. It's not mandatory, but you can do. I've used it within this application so I can see it. And then you can call them the applications up. So that's how that works. To run it, all you do once you've got those things set up is you decide what you're going to use and you click start. And when I click start, you can see that automatically I'm given a webhook URL. This will be different every time I do it. So I'm not too worried about sharing that with you because it will be irrelevant and there's nothing you can do with it anyway. I'm going to copy that webhook URL. And I'm going to insert that here into the webhook URL. I then select the events I want it to act on, or the events that I want to be sent to that webhook URL so I can see what's happening. So I'll take the project task created so that I can look at every single task that gets created as we're going along. I then save that. That updates my application. I leave this running the whole time, and then I close the integrations. Let's go back to the projects, and we'll create a new project. So we're going for new project. I'll give it a name. Let's call it the 01 Trados Callback. I can give it a description. I'm not interested for testing. I decide where I want the location to be. I've set my templates and everything up to be in the administration operations. So it's already pulled that information up there. I can then, let me see, I need to get a file of some sort. I should have prepared that for, so I forgot. Let me just get a file I can drop in here. I'll drop the technical design document in. It's a markdown document. We're not going to be looking at it really. We just need something to be there. And then I'm just going to click create and start because my template is set up to do everything that I need to do. And if you just keep an eye on the right-hand side of the screen, we should start receiving some webhooks as the project starts unfolding. So we've already received 2. So if I open up the project, so we can just go and have a look before I go any further so you can see what's happening. And this is where the application I think is really useful, because this begins to explain how webhooks work and what they're useful for. So you can see the stages we've reached are the engineering. And this is a task now. What would happen is that when the files, when they're dropped in, as they're being prepared and the project's created, there's an engineering task to take place, probably to check the document, make sure they're ready, make sure they're set up properly and to be converted to a bilingual file. Whatever it is that the engineering team has to do, it stops at that point so the work can be assigned to them. Now here, for example, this could be, I could be a receiving application that says, okay, once that's reached the engineering task, I know I've got to take that document out because I'm going to do some work on it before it goes further into the workflow. And so I've been notified in my application of the first task, which was the scan, and the second task, which is the engineering task itself. Now, both of them look the same at this level within the webhook, but if I scroll down to the details of the event itself, you can see that when I click on the different ones, the information changes. So within the webhook, I'll be able to identify which task type it is. And then in my own application, in this case in Trados Callback Catcher, I can filter out on the ones that I wanted. Now in this application, what I've actually done is I've used the APIs to identify which task my service user has been assigned to. And so after it receives all of the callbacks, it then does another quick run through and has a look and sees which ones were relevant and then highlights it. So, and that's why the engineering is highlighted in green. And we'll see that as we move through the workflow, you'll see how that principle works. So if we move it on a step, I come to engineering, I complete the task. I'll just complete it. Now we should start getting some more callbacks as the stages continue. So you can see we're getting quite a lot here. So you can see how really it's like a fire hose. The integrating application on a large project is going to be receiving a lot of information that it might not really want. And it would be quite handy really if you were able to filter this through Trados, so you only see what you want, but you can't. So the integrating application has to do the work of picking out what it wants. You can see that we've reached the translation stage. At this point, if I scroll back up through there, you can see we've still got none of the ones we wanted because my next stage is the hold for feedback. So if I was to just complete one of those translations, for example, it's important you don't complete the project here or you'll just blow it. But I'll complete the task to move so it can move on to another stage. That file is now moving through and you can see it's now reached the hold for feedback stage. So I've got one bit of feedback that's come back to me through the webhook saying to me, okay, that file is now ready. It's reached the hold for feedback stage. If I now just pick the rest of them and I complete those tasks as well and complete them, it'll run through and do the same thing with the rest of them. And so I should end up with some more, which are just relevant to those ones. So what I've done here by highlighting it is effectively what the integrating application needs to do itself. in order to identify the tasks that it's interested to and just disregard all the rest. So all the rest of the stuff that comes through might well be in a log somewhere, but we're only interested in 5 of them in this case. So to make it easier to see them within this application, I've created some filters at the top here. You can do it by typing something in. So if I wanted to see the engineering, I could just start typing engineering, and in real time it'll filter for it so I can see it straight away. If I wanted to see just the highlighted ones, I can click on the star, and when I do that, it's going to filter immediately on all of the callbacks that I was specifically interested in. So when I set up the service user and added them to a group and added that to the specific tasks in the workflow, the only information I was really interested in was the help for feedback and the engineering. So the integrating application is the application that's responsible for filtering on all of those, on all of the tasks that are coming through. So it only has to deal with the ones that are important for it. So in this case, it would have been, for me, just these 5. The tick and the cross are just there for completeness, really. Was what I tried to do was I go to the settings quickly, and to Trados, and when you add a new one, in here, this secret key is used for webhook signature verification. It's an optional field. You can put it there. It just gives Trados, it's an optional check that allows you to validate that the application that is sending or the application that is receiving the webhook, the information from the webhook URL that you put into Trados is the correct application. Some organizations, if they're using some standard, I'm not quite sure what they may be, but they may have internal procedures that require that additional security. And you can test that in this application by taking the secret key out of Trados when you configure it, and then what you enter in here, delete a couple of characters so it's not the same. And then when you run this test, what will actually happen is that this won't be a tick, it'll be a cross. So in reality, with this application, these are always going to be correct if you're putting the information in from Trados, because it's always going to do it right. But there are occasions when things won't work, and you may have a problem. And that's the other thing where I wanted this application to be useful. So the way that would work is you would pick one task that might be relevant to where you thought you might be having a problem. And the problem might be just that the webhook is not getting through to your application. You just can't make it work. And one of the things that you can do is you can set up the Trados Callback Catcher either before or after, and assign the same service user that you've created for this to the ones that are being used by the real integrating application. And so when you run the project or create the project, you can be receiving callbacks from the Trados Callback Catcher and from the real integrating application at the same time. And if there are problems with it getting through to the real integrating application, but you're seeing them coming through in here, then at least you have some confidence that Trados has been configured correctly, because you wouldn't be receiving everything otherwise. And the problem has to be related to something else that's happening between or preventing the integrating application from being able to receive traffic from Trados, and possibly even sending things to Trados. I don't know. And so the way you can check that, once you've done this and you've made sure it's working, if you click on any one of the tasks and then click on the troubleshooting tab, this will bring out some various information which you can then use to share with the technical support team. You can just click on the copy button, and that will paste everything without the explanations. Let me just show you. In fact, if I bring up a little, I've got Editpad Pro down here, which I might do for this. It works better in an email, but if you just copy all and then go to your email or whatever you're going to post it and just stick it straight in, it's going to paste straight away the webhook troubleshooting report, which you can then give straight away to your ticket. And this contains lots of useful information, which the support team, it'll save you trying to dig it out, save the support team having to ask for everything, and it might actually help identify where a problem might be or where the sticking point might be. So for example, you get a quick summary at the beginning, identifying the webhook event and its context. So you've got the tenant name, the tenant ID, the event type, the timestamp, the task name, the project ID, the batch position, the networking connection. So you get the source IP. The source IP actually is probably the only thing that I'm pulling out of that webhook that I'm received that is not in the webhook. Everything else is coming directly from the webhook. The source IP I had to get a different way, but that might be worth checking if you're having problems trying to get through a firewall or proxy or something. So you can check that. You get some information on the response time, because sometimes things might be getting blocked. Maybe an antivirus tool or something like that is causing it to take longer than it should, and so you're getting timeouts. You can check the request integrity, so looking for truncated payloads that might be coming in by comparing their content length and the actual body size. The number of retries, correlation and tracing. So there's a lot of useful information in there. You can just grab all that in one go, send that to support team, and if it's something that the support team need to identify because you're having a problem with your application, this information will be really relevant. If it's a problem for the actual integrating application and not necessarily yours, this information could still be useful because it gives them things that they can check and work through to try and be able to try and identify what's going wrong. And there should be no problem giving it to them, because when it works, they're going to be receiving all the same information. So there's nothing secret here that you shouldn't be giving the developer who's working on this. They can get all the same information themselves, and they will be receiving it on a regular basis once their webhook is working. So it's really just a troubleshooting tool, and you can satisfy yourself that everything on the Trados side is working, and it might be helpful to identify where the problem's coming from. So that's it really. Two things that this application I think is useful for. One, for troubleshooting, as we just looked at, but two, and possibly more importantly, I think it helps to cement what webhooks are for and how they work, because you can see it in context in line with the way things are working in Trados Studio, and you can see how it's working. There's nothing in the webhook that actually does anything. It's just sending a note, a letter to the application saying, I've now reached this stage in the workflow, go do something. And that's what it's for. And I hope that helps to remove all the mystique that comes from setting these things up and being able to work with webhooks. Certainly developing this tool and working on it and writing this article has helped me tremendously in understanding in a clearer way how it all works. And that's it. Thanks for watching.